Hey guys, welcome back to Total Tactics FPL. Today's video is going to be on GW17 team selection, and I'll be looking back into FPL after a great World Cup fantasy run. We now get the chance to incorporate players with the unlimited transfers that we have in GW17 by looking at the kind of double game week fixtures that were announced, the form of some players that exhibited some great success in the World Cup, such as a Rashford or Saka in terms of the individual kind of point of view, and then also players that we would like to reincorporate into our teams that haven't unfortunately featured in the World Cup, such as an Erling Haaland. As far as Kepa and James, these are two players that I'd like to bring into my team from this Chelsea team who get a double game week fixture in game week 19. And with Kepa, I think what's interesting about him is that he probably could be the least rotation prone Chelsea defender if he gets to start over Edouard Mendy. I think Potter will simply just pick one keeper to go towards the end of the season unless Kepa once again bombs with really poor confidence. But I think this is the perfect position for him because he had such a great run of games heading towards the World Cup, and he made a lot of saves too, which I think is a little bit of an interesting point of view to look at. This Chelsea team actually has some great defenders, but they didn't really perform very well, and unfortunately Kepa was actually the one bailing them out. So Kepa has that security blanket now with his confidence and also the form that he showed for Potter. Hopefully Potter gets to continue to reward him with starting performances, and Reece James, you have that double-edged threat anyways, where even though he's such a low floor player in FPL with Chelsea defense being so poor, you still have that ceiling here with Reece James can get these expected goal involvements. And we've already seen time and time again in the last two seasons where Reece James has gotten a lot of bonus involvements even though Chelsea have lost their clean sheet. So I think that's the kind of security blanket you have with Reece James. You can have some really high highs but some really low lows. But I'd prefer actually getting the chance to get those high highs with Reece James as opposed to going with a much more consistent asset for now. And I also think that with the kind of budget flexibility that we have with some of the cheap options from Newcastle, from United, and even from Arsenal, there's no reason to really go away from Reece James. As far as Cancelo and Trippier, these are two options that have been fantastic all year round. A lot of people have mentioned that there could be scope to move away from Cancelo and move into someone like a Walker at 4.8 million. But I think Cancelo, even though his expected goal involvements have dropped, he hasn't really been reduced to being an asset that I'd like to move away from, because Cancelo is someone who still takes a lot of the passes in the system. He occupies the ball a lot, and he still takes a lot of shots on target. And those don't really contribute very highly into expected goal involvements because he's taking a lot of these kind of ridiculous shots outside the box, but we know he's got the quality to actually score them. So Cancelo is someone who already, I think, has hurt a lot of managers who've moved away from him this season, and I can't see myself doing that myself. As far as Trippier, he's been the most consistent asset all year, the FPL. He probably could be the second best captaincy option and probably the first best if Haaland didn't exist. And for me, even though he might have a little bit of injury shout, I don't think that's going to be substantial, so I think I'm going to keep Trippier in my team. As far as Ward, he's a great security blanket for Kepa because worst case scenario, if Mendy gets to actually start some games or they rotate in the near future, you've got Ward filling in anyways. And then White, he's an option here where he's one of my placeholders here, as I mentioned, with the defensive positions, where White could either be a Shaw or a Dalot if you had a little bit more money available. I just like that White will have a double game week fixture in the near future when that kind of Man City game gets rescheduled, but also that simply he gets this kind of benefit of being subbed off quite early in these Arsenal games, where Arsenal are actually a top 2 defense in the league this season, and we've already seen that in the expected goals conceded, not necessarily the amount of clean sheets they've gotten, but more so in how many chances that they're actually reducing their opponents to, or how few shots teams are actually being able to take versus them on target. So White for me is interesting because he always gets that 65 to 75 minute sub from Arteta. So even though maybe, let's say, the chances of him getting bonus points aren't too high in terms of getting the 3 points, the 2 points, you still see actually White very consistently getting into the bonus areas because he still contributes a lot on the pitch. He does a lot of defensive involvement kind of actions, but also actually has the potential to get some expected assist threats. So even though he doesn't have these kind of expected goal in contributions, such as Saliba or Gabriel on a set piece play where they actually get to score. One thing about Saliba, of course, is that he has 4 yellow cards, and then with Gabriel, I think he's too expensive considering Arsenal's run of games. And I think Arsenal here, having an option like a Ben White who's much cheaper, for me, suits myself and my kind of FPL team structure much better, where he's going to be a kind of 4/5th option going forwards. As far as Bueno, he's someone who's playing for Julian Lopetegui now. He played it in the first friendly and played 90 minutes, seemed to have a good performance there, and I don't think there's any reason to move away from him. He's someone who actually was featuring already for this Wolves team even before Julian Lopetegui was hired. So I would say Bueno is a great option because you have to think about how to actually create a team that actually has 15 playing players, because with the World Cup, with the injuries that we might inevitably have, you probably don't want to be wasting too much transfers, and you actually need to have players that you can call upon from your bench regardless. And I think Bueno at 3.9 is exactly that option. Andreas is going to be my kind of 4.5 around that sort of tier midfielder that I'd love to incorporate because he has a double gaming fixture in the near future. And simply put, Andreas has been fantastic this season. We actually thought that he was a bit more of a set piece merchant early in the season, but we continue to actually see Fulham develop in terms of open play, and Andreas himself was someone who actually shown quite a bit, specifically when Mitrovic was actually out. But I think he's also been someone who actually has some really great numbers even when Mitrovic is playing, so we shouldn't really be shy about pairing up Andreas with Mitrovic once again. So for me, Andreas is someone who is absolutely nailed on my team, and definitely someone I'm actually prioritizing over someone like an ALMIRON. As far as the actual midfielder team, now that we're actually talking about Andreas, I've actually gone for Saka, Martinelli, Rashford, and Salah. So you can clearly see that I've dropped ALMIRON from the team. A lot of people will still be going for ALMIRON. I completely understand that he's been one of the astounding players this season, and this Newcastle team have also been a top defense. A top offense in the Premier League if you actually look at expected goals contributed from the team, and he also has really, really good expected goal contributions per 90 as well. So I do think ALMIRON's a great option to go for, but I just think that I prefer Martinelli and Rashford in that kind of position. And I think, simply put, Saka is a player that is a placeholder, right, for that 8.0 position where you might want to move into Maddison or Foden if you actually enable a little bit more budget in the future, or you could just go into a player like a Mount or a Kulusevski at the same time, where Mount has these double game week fixtures, or if you prefer Kulusevski, he could potentially cover for someone like Kane if you think he can do that. He's a bit more of a creative player, so I do like Saka a bit more because he's a bit more direct, so that's kind of why I've incorporated Saka in the team. And I think even though Arsenal has some tough games on paper, that's more of a tough game on paper from the defensive point of view. I think Arsenal have still been a very, very lethal attack in spite of whoever they've been playing, so I think Saka is someone that I'm very confident will deliver, specifically with the absence of Jesus, where he needs to be someone who is continuing to be very, very direct for this Arsenal team. And similar to the kind of end of last season where Nketiah was actually debutizing in that striker position, I think Saka was actually still the main man there. And with the penalties and the added threat of that, I think Arsenal will be one of the teams that you should still actually spend 2 to 3 players on and keeping in your team, because I think they're just one of the top 2 teams in the league. As far as Rashford and Martinelli, the reason why I've gone for them over ALMIRON isn't anything specific, as I said. I just think that Rashford and Martinelli are 2 players that have shown some great form. Rashford specifically in the World Cup, and then Martinelli just simply over the course of the Premier League. He has kind of matched ALMIRON, I would say, very similarly in terms of the expected goal involvements. He's a bit more of a creative player, Martinelli is, compared to someone like ALMIRON, who's a bit more of a goal scorer. And I think that when you look at Callum Wilson and his potential injury situation, that might actually reduce the overall threat of this Newcastle offense. We've actually seen that Callum Wilson has been a little bit of kind of like a kind of on-off plus or positive overall for this Newcastle team, and we don't really know how well they can actually play without him, because when Isak is actually deputizing as the striker, we've only seen limited good performances from this Newcastle team and also from ALMIRON. So I do think that he benefits quite a bit from playing with Callum Wilson, and that's going to be a little bit of a tough task if, let's say, Wilson is dealing with a bit of an injury situation, where it seems like Eddie Howe has hinted towards. Either way, I think you can easily go for ALMIRON in your team if you'd like to. I'd probably prefer going for ALMIRON over Martinelli, because if you already have Saka in your team, that probably makes sense. If you don't have Saka in your team, then I would probably justify it by going out of Rashford instead. As far as Salah, he's someone that we brought into the team in the midway point of the first half of the Premier League season. And he's been someone who's actually starting to deliver a little bit more from the goal-scoring point of view. And I think he's finally finding his role in terms of how he's able to contribute from the attacking end of things. A lot of people have been talking about kind of his position on the pitch, whether he's playing central, whether he's playing right wing. But now with the kind of injury situations, and also just simply just watching this Liverpool team play, regardless of whether he plays in the right or the striker positions, I still think that he's still a very similar threat. The reality is he just hasn't been as clinical as he was in other points in the previous season. But I think we've already seen that from history and from what we've seen from Salah, that he is a very clinical finisher. And it just simply comes back down to a little bit of a thing called variance. And I think that Salah will probably return back to the mean, where he is a kind of very lethal finisher. And he already showed signs of that in the Champions League specifically, but also in the last few games of the season, with this Liverpool team finding a little bit more juice in the back half there. As far as the forwards in the team and also the captaincy, I'm going to slam the captaincy, of course, on Haaland. I think he's a very simple, clear-cut captaincy option. Going back into the World Cup restart here, he didn't get to play in the World Cup. He's probably obviously been training. If you guys watched the video about Haaland, he's been quite lonely without his teammates. But I think now with Kevin De Bruyne back, he'll be finding his way back towards the goals. We already saw that in the friendly match as well. As far as Salah, I think he's a great vice-captaincy option, and probably going forwards will be still one of the top threats in the league. Still the Liverpool penalty taker, and someone that I would like to trust. And I also still think that this Liverpool team was still showing some great signs of life, specifically with Darwin playing quite a bit. And Firmino, of course, will share a lot of the minutes with Darwin. Maybe Salah will have to be pushed towards the right. But the injury situation with Luis Diaz and also Jota just means that Darwin will get much more minutes in this time, and he will be called upon and required to deliver at this time. So I think Darwin is someone who I would like to keep for now. You could also downgrade Darwin into options like Callum Wilson if it seems like he's actually fit to play. That way you can also potentially also cover someone like an ALMIRON if you're, let's say, fearful of the Newcastle threat on the offensive point of view. Or you could also just go for someone like a Solanke or an Anthony Martial, who's a bit more of a punt. But I think Martial is someone you'd probably like to go for if you don't want to go for Rashford, because I'm not overly confident in this United attack. I'd probably prefer a Fernandes if you really wanted to go that way, but I think Fernandes is very overpriced and Rashford just simply is much more appealing, even Anthony as well, because it seems like he's probably less injury prone than someone like Anthony Martial. As far as Mitrovic, you've got an option here where he's got a double game week in the very near future, and I don't think there's any reason to move away from Mitrovic. He's just been such a permanent option in terms of actually being the penalty taker for this Fulham team, who somehow are able to actually draw penalties very consistently and at a very kind of top rate in the league. And he's also just been a clinical finisher and someone that we've seen has delivered in some of the very tough games in the Premier League. So now that he has an easier fixture run, we're hoping that he gets to deliver fit from injury and also being able to recover after being knocked out in the group stages in the World Cup. And that's going to be my Game Week 17 draft. Of course, 1 to 2 changes that will prospectively be changed if we actually get some updated injury news, or if we get some developments as well from managers in terms of whether they're going to actually incorporate players like a Callum Wilson in the near future. So that's going to be my thoughts on my Game Week 17 draft. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll see you guys in the next video.